He flipped an old boat in the middle of a snowstorm, just to give stray dogs a place to survive.
Fall back!
But deep
Move!
down, a Navy SEAL wasn't saving strangers. He was hoping his own lost dog was still alive somewhere out there. For 2 years, he checked the same mailbox, fixed the same broken house, and waited for something that never came. Until one day, in the silence between storms, the past stepped closer, but not in the way he expected. Because sometimes, the ones we love don't come back to us. They simply find a place where they are needed more. And the hardest choice is not losing them, but letting them stay. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 followers so we can keep telling meaningful stories. Now, let's begin. The lake did not welcome people. It reflected them. Cold, exact, and honest like a mirror that had no interest in kindness. Morning light stretched across the surface of Alder Reach in pale ribbons, thin and sharp, gliding over patches of melting ice. The wind carried the smell of damp wood, iron, and something older something that had outlived every house built along its edge. Rowan Vale stood at the front of the property that no one wanted. He did not move for a long time. Not because he was unsure, because standing still had become a habit one he had learned somewhere far from here, in places where moving too soon meant not moving again. He was a man built for motion, but shaped by restraint. 35 years old, tall just over 6 feet, lean, compact strength, the kind that didn't advertise itself. His face was clean-shaven, and the sharp angles of his jaw and cheekbones exposed like edges worn by wind and discipline. His skin held the faint roughness of cold climates, a pale tone touched by years of harsh air. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, though it had grown just enough to soften the severity. His eyes, gray-blue, did not scan the world. They observed it, quietly, without judgment, as if he had already seen enough. He wore the same clothes he always wore. An old olive-gray tactical combat shirt, the fabric softened from years of use, faintly frayed at the cuffs and shoulders. Underneath, a dark red thermal layer peaked at the collar, a small, stubborn note of warmth beneath the worn exterior. His combat pants, faded earth brown with sagging utility pockets, carried creases that no longer held shape. His boots were heavy, scratched, dependable. On his wrist, a military watch that had outlasted everything it was meant to measure. Yet the house behind him leaned slightly to one side, not dramatically, just enough to make people uneasy. Wood planks warped, paint peeled. One window was boarded. The front steps creaked before anyone stepped on them. It had been on the market for 3 years. No one wanted it. Rowan bought it in one afternoon. Cash. No inspection. No negotiation. The realtor had asked once, only once, why. Rowan had looked past her, toward the lake, and said nothing. Because the truth was too simple. This was the last place Atlas knew as home. Inside, the house smelled of old winters. Dust drifted in thin beams of light cutting through cracked blinds. The floor groaned under each step, not in protest, but in memory, as if it had been waiting too long for weight to return. Rowan placed his bag down near the door. He didn't unpack. Not yet. Instead, he walked through each room slowly, touching nothing. Just looking. The kitchen? Small, functional. A rusted sink. The back room, where a bed used to be. The doorway that led to the porch. His gaze lingered there. A flicker not of sight, but of recall. A shape that wasn't there anymore. A dog sitting just beyond the threshold, not crossing in, waiting, always waiting, until told. Rowan exhaled slowly. It wasn't grief that tightened his chest. It was something quieter, something more stubborn. Outside, the wind shifted. He stepped back onto the porch, boots thudding softly against the worn wood. The mailbox stood at the edge of the property, slightly tilted. Its red flag faded into something closer to rust than color. Rowan walked to it, opened it. Empty. He didn't react, didn't sigh, didn't frown. He simply looked inside for a moment longer than necessary, then closed it, gently, as if something fragile had almost been there. He didn't stay idle. Rowan never stayed idle. By midday, he had already started work. Boards were replaced, nails driven in straight lines, broken hinges removed and reset, movements precise, efficient, almost mechanical, but not careless. Every action held weight, like it mattered beyond the task itself. Because it did. He wasn't fixing a house. He was preserving a location, a point on the map that had to remain exactly where it was. Because if Atlas came back, it had to be recognizable. Around late afternoon, a truck rolled slowly past the property. It slowed. Not enough to stop. But enough. The driver glanced out, an older man with a broad frame and a beard that had gone gray unevenly. His eyes lingered just long enough to register the scene. A stranger fixing a dead house. Then he drove on. Rowan didn't look up. He had already felt the gaze. He always did. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the yard and into the road. Rowan wiped his hands on his pants and stepped back, looking at the front of the house. It was still broken, still leaning, still unwanted. But now, it was occupied. That mattered. That night, just as the last light disappeared beyond the lake, Rowan heard something. Not loud, not clear, just a faint sound against wood, a single, soft tap, like something brushing the porch. Rowan froze. His body reacted before his mind did, shoulders tightening, breath held halfway. He turned slowly. The porch was empty. The wind moved lightly through the boards, making them creak in uneven rhythm. Nothing. He stepped forward anyway. Opened the door. Looked out. No shape, no shadow. No movement. Just the cold. And the lake. Rowan stood there for several seconds longer than needed, then nodded once to no one. Closed the door. But that night, he didn't latch it. Sleep did not come easily. It never did. Rowan lay on a mattress without sheets, staring at the ceiling, listening. Not for danger. For something else. Something he couldn't name without breaking it. Every small sound mattered. Wood shifting, wind brushing against the house, the distant crack of ice settling on the lake. And once, just once, he thought he heard it again. A step. Light. Measured. Controlled. Like something that knew exactly how much noise it was allowed to make. Rowan closed his eyes. Didn't move. Didn't get up. Because if he checked and nothing was there, it would mean something had ended. And he wasn't ready for that. Morning came quietly. Gray light first, then pale gold. The lake softened. The world resumed. Rowan got up. No hesitation. No lingering. He stepped outside, walked straight to the mailbox. Opened it. Empty. This time, he didn't pause. He closed it immediately. Turned. and began working again. Not because he believed Atlas would return, not anymore, but because if there was even the smallest chance, then this place had to be ready. Across the lake, unseen from where he stood, something moved between the trees. A shape, low to the ground, slow, careful. It stopped, turned its head, and for a moment it listened. Morning arrived without ceremony. The kind of morning that did not ask how a man had slept, only whether he would get up. Rowan Vale did. The cold had settled into the wood overnight. It lived in the floorboards now, in the walls, in the small cracks that let the wind whisper through. When his boots touched the floor, the chill moved upward, not sharp, not sudden, just present, like something that intended to stay. He dressed the same way he always did. No variation, no hesitation. The olive-gray combat shirt, worn soft from years of use, the dark red thermal beneath it, barely visible at the collar like a memory he never explained. His combat pants hung with the weight of habit, the pockets slightly pulled down from use, not neglect. Boots tied tight. Watch checked once, not for time, but for rhythm. Outside, on Alder Reach looked as though nothing had ever gone wrong in the world. Sunlight moved slowly across the lake, brushing the remaining ice with pale gold. The surface cracked quietly in places, shifting, adjusting. Somewhere distant, a branch gave way under thawing weight. Rowan stepped out, closing the door behind him with care. He did not look toward the porch. He walked straight to the mailbox. Opened it. Empty. Closed it. No pause this time. He turned back toward the house, already planning what needed fixing next. The left window frame, the back hinge, the loose plank near the steps, movement replaced thought. That was the only way forward. By mid-morning, the sound of hammering carried across the yard. Measured strikes, not loud, not rushed. Rowan worked without interruption. He did not hum, did not speak. The rhythm of his movements was steady enough to feel almost rehearsed, though no one had ever taught him how to rebuild a place meant for waiting. A truck pulled up sometime after noon. This one did not slow. It stopped. The driver stepped out, a man in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, thick through the middle, wearing a flannel shirt beneath a heavy jacket. His beard was uneven, flecked with gray, and his eyes held that permanent squint of someone used to judging distances more than people. Deke Holler. Deke Holler and the hardware store 2 roads down, the kind of place where people came not only for nails and rope, but for opinions they didn't ask for. He stood with his hands on his hips, looking at Rowan's work like he was inspecting something slightly amusing. "You the one bought this place?" he called out. Rowan didn't look up immediately. He finished driving the nail in, straight and flush, before turning. "Yes." Deke gave a short laugh. "That's so." He walked a few steps closer, boots crunching lightly against gravel. "Didn't think anyone would take this one. Too close to the water. Foundation's off. Roof'll need more than patchwork." Rowan nodded once. "I'll fix it." Deke studied him a moment longer. "You from around here?" "No." "Figured." There was a pause. Not awkward. Just empty. Then Deke's gaze drifted toward the side of the yard, where an old wooden boat lay half-buried in weeds and thyme. "You planning to use that thing?" he asked. Rowan followed his line of sight. The boat had once been painted white. Now it was a peeling memory of it. One side had cracked along the grain, the wood darkened from years of moisture. It had no engine, no oars, no purpose. Rowan shook his head. "No." Deke smirked. "Shame. Might float if you don't look at it too hard." He chuckled at his own joke, then glanced back at Rowan, waiting for something, agreement, maybe. Rowan didn't laugh. Deke shrugged. Well, if you need supplies, you know where to find me. He turned, walked back to his truck, and drove off without another word. Dust settled slowly in his wake. The afternoon stretched long and quiet again. Rowan worked through it. But something had shifted, not outside, but inward. A small pressure, barely noticeable, like a thought that hadn't formed yet. He noticed it when he stopped for water. The yard felt observed. Not by a person. Not in a way that made his shoulders tighten. Just watched. Rowan turned his head slightly. Nothing moved. The tree line stood still. The lake carried its slow, reflective calm. The old boat remained where it had always been, tilted, forgotten. He exhaled and went back to work. Later, as the light began to soften, Rowan walked toward the edge of the yard. He didn't know why. There was no task waiting there, no board to fix, no nail to drive, but his steps carried him anyway, slow and deliberate, boots pressing shallow marks into the damp ground. He stopped near the boat. Up close it looked worse, and the wood had warped along its length. One side had split enough to let cold air pass straight through. The inside was filled with dry leaves and old debris, gathered over seasons that had come and gone without interruption. Rowan crouched slightly, brushing a hand along the surface. The wood was rough, but not entirely gone. Still usable. In a different way. A sound. Not from the house. Not from the road. From behind him. Rowan turned sharply, faster than before, faster than he had allowed himself since arriving. At the edge of the trees, something moved. Low. Brief. Gone. No shape held long enough to confirm, but the space it left behind felt occupied. Rowan didn't step forward, didn't call out. He simply stood there, watching the place where the movement had been. Waiting. The silence returned. But it did not feel empty. Rowan straightened slowly, his gaze shifted back to the boat. A thought settled, not sudden, not forced. Just, so correct. He moved without hesitation, gripped the side of the boat, tested its weight. Heavy, but manageable. He adjusted his stance, boots digging slightly into the ground for leverage, and pushed. The boat resisted at first, stuck in the earth. Then it gave, a slow, dragging shift. Wood scraped against soil with a low, uneven sound. Rowan repositioned, lifted one edge higher, and turned it over. The boat fell with a hollow thud. Upside down. The curved hull now facing the sky. He stepped back, breathing slightly heavier, and looked at it. Then down at the ground beneath. Sheltered. Dry. Protected from wind on 3 sides. Not perfect, but enough. He worked on it until dusk. Reinforced one side with spare boards. Wedged stones along the edges to keep it steady. Cleared the ground beneath it. Laid down an old piece of fabric he found inside the house worn, but still intact. Every movement precise, not rushed, not careless. And by the time the light faded, the boat no longer looked abandoned. It looked intentional. The next day, people noticed. A woman walking her dog slowed, stared, then moved on. 2 teenagers passed by and laughed openly. What is that supposed to be? Man's building a house for ghosts, the words carried. Rowan heard them. He didn't respond. Later, Deke drove by again. This time he stopped only long enough to lean out the window. You serious? He called, pointing at the overturned boat. Rowan glanced up briefly. Yes. Deke shook his head, half amused, half confused. "All right, then." He drove off again. Toward evening, another figure approached. A woman this time. Mid-40s, maybe a little older. Tall, lean, her posture straight without stiffness. Her dark hair was tied back low, practical. Her face carried lines that weren't from age alone, lines of someone who had spent years looking closely at things that couldn't speak for themselves. Nora Bell. Nora Bell. She stopped a few feet from Rowan, her eyes moving from him to the boat, then back again. "You planning to keep something in there?" she asked. "Maybe." She studied him. "You know, stray dogs don't stay long if they don't feel safe." Rowan nodded. "I know." Nora's gaze lingered on his face a moment longer than most people allowed themselves. Not intrusive, just observant. "You fixing the house for yourself?" she asked. Rowan paused, then, "No." Nora didn't ask the obvious follow-up. Instead, she glanced once more at the boat, then at the tree line beyond it. "Winter's not done yet," she said quietly. "I know." She nodded once, as if confirming something only she had been checking, then turned and walked away. Night came again. This time, Rowan did not wait for sound. He closed the door, but not fully. The latch remained undone. Later, when the wind settled into its low, steady rhythm, something moved beneath the boat. Careful, measured. A pause, then stillness. Inside the house, Rowan lay awake. Eyes open, not moving, not checking. Because now, he knew something was there. And for the first time since he arrived, that was enough. The morning did not feel new. It felt watched. Rowan Vale stepped out of the house before the light had fully settled over Alder Reach. The sky was still pale, a washed-out gray leaning toward gold, and the lake held its breath beneath a thin veil of mist. The world looked unfinished, like something that had not yet decided what it wanted to become. He didn't stretch, didn't linger. He walked straight toward the overturned boat. His boots moved quietly over the damp ground, each step controlled, measured not out of caution, but habit. The kind that did not fade, even when the war had. The boat stood where he had left it. But something had changed. Rowan slowed, then stopped. The ground beneath the boat was no longer untouched. He crouched slightly, his eyes narrowing, not in suspicion, but in focus. Tracks. Not random, not scattered. Yet they were deliberate. A set of paw prints pressed into the softened earth, slightly deeper on one side, uneven in rhythm, large, too large for a stray. Rowan didn't reach out to touch them. He didn't need to. He had spent years reading ground like it could speak. These prints didn't belong to panic. They belonged to control, to something that moved carefully, even when it had no reason to hide. Rowan exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not yet. But something shifted. Something that had been silent for a long time. Leaned forward. He stood up, his gaze following the tracks outward. They moved away from the boat, toward the trees, but not in a straight line. They curved, paused, turned, as if whatever had made them had not been in a hurry, or worse, had been deciding. Rowan followed for a few steps, then stopped. His jaw tightened slightly. He could track further. He could follow this, push it, force an answer. But that wasn't how this worked. Not this time. He stepped back. Let the trail be. As if it came once, It could come again. And if it came again, he needed to be here. The rest of the morning moved slower. Rowan returned to the house, but his focus was no longer on repairs. Every sound mattered now. The shift of wind through the boards, the subtle creak of wood expanding under light, the distant call of something unseen across the lake. He worked anyway, hand steady, mind elsewhere. He fixed the back hinge, replaced 2 warped planks near the porch, adjusted the door frame so it would close more evenly. Each task done right. Each motion precise. Because that was the only way he knew how to stay in place without falling apart. Around midday, the sound of gravel crunching approached. Rowan didn't look up immediately. He knew the rhythm. Lighter than a truck. Steadier than a walk. A delivery route. He stepped outside. Evelyn Pike stood by the mailbox. She was in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, and with a posture that hadn't softened despite the years. Her coat hung straight, practical, dark blue with a faded patch at the shoulder. A canvas mailbag rested against her hip, worn but maintained. Her face was lined, not from age alone, but from habit watching, noticing, remembering. Her eyes were the kind that didn't miss patterns or changes. "You're up early," she said. Rowan nodded once. "Always am." She didn't smile. Evelyn wasn't unkind. She just didn't waste expressions. She opened the mailbox, shuffled through a small stack of envelopes, then handed him 2. Utility bills. Nothing more. Rowan took them without comment. Evelyn didn't leave right away. Her gaze drifted, not to Rowan, but to the boat, then to the ground around it, then back to Rowan. "You've got visitors," she said. Not a question. Rowan's grip on the letters tightened, just slightly. "You saw them?" Evelyn shook her head once. "No." A pause. Then, "But I saw what they left." Rowan studied her. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her bag. "Big dog," she said, "not stray-sized." Another pause. "Walks like it knows where it's going." That landed. Not because it confirmed anything, but because it aligned. Exactly. Rowan nodded once. "Yeah." Evelyn watched him for a moment longer. "You expecting it?" Rowan didn't answer. Because expectation had a shape, and he had spent 2 years trying not to give it one. Evelyn didn't push. She never did. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a folded envelope older, edges softened from time, and held it out. "This came back," she said. Rowan took it, looked at it. His name, his handwriting. A return address scratched out. It had been forwarded once, then returned. No answer. He didn't open it. Not here. Not in front of her. Evelyn nodded slightly, then turned, walked back to her vehicle, and drove off. Rowan stood there longer than necessary. The envelope in his hand felt heavier than paper should. He slipped it into his pocket. Not ready. Not yet. Later that afternoon, as the light dipped and the shadows stretched long across the yard, Rowan heard something again. Not from the house, not from the trees, from the boat, a shift, soft, controlled. Rowan turned slowly. The boat did not move, but the space beneath it breathed. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. No sudden movement, no call, just presence. He stopped a few feet away, waited. Nothing. Then, a faint sound, not a growl, not fear, something quieter, a low exhale, like a creature trying not to be heard. Rowan didn't crouch, didn't reach. He simply stood there and spoke just once. All right. Not a command, not a plea. Just acknowledgement. The sound beneath the boat stilled, but it did not leave. Evening came with a colder edge. The lake darkened first, then the sky followed. Rowan lit a small lamp inside the house, not for comfort, but for visibility. A habit carried from places where darkness was not neutral. He sat at the table, once the envelope lay in front of him now. He stared at it, for a long time, then finally opened it. Inside, just a note. Short, formal, uncertain. No confirmed recovery of K9 unit matching description. Records incomplete. Rowan read it once, then again, then folded it back, carefully. Placed it on the table. Not thrown, not crushed, just set down. Because anger would have required surprise, and he had none left for that. Outside, the night settled deeper. The wind moved differently now. Sharper, colder, more direct. Rowan stood, walked to the door, and opened it. The yard was quiet. The boat remained. Unmoving, but not empty. He knew that now. Not because he had seen it, but because something had chosen to stay. At least for now. Rowan stepped out onto the porch, left the door open behind him. He didn't move toward the boat this time. Didn't check, didn't confirm. Because some things, if pushed, would disappear. And he wasn't here to chase anymore. He was here to be found. The day began with weight. Not the kind carried in muscles, or in tools, or even in memory. This was quieter. It lived somewhere behind Rowan Vale's ribs, steady, patient, like something that had been waiting for permission to be acknowledged. He stepped outside before sunrise, the air cutting sharper than it had the day before. The lake had lost its softness. Its surface was darker now, reflecting less light and more sky, as if it had decided to stop pretending to be welcoming. Rowan walked past the mailbox without opening it. That was new, not because he had stopped checking, but because something had shifted in the way he understood waiting. There were answers that did not arrive in envelopes, and there were truths that did not need to be delivered. He moved toward the tree line. Not quickly, not cautiously, just directly. And the tracks from the previous day had faded slightly under the night's cold, but they hadn't disappeared. The impressions were still there, deep enough to resist the wind, uneven enough to tell a story. Rowan followed them further this time. He didn't hesitate. Because now, this wasn't about chasing. It was about confirming. The path curved again, leading away from the boat, past a line of low shrubs, then toward a narrow break in the trees. Rowan stepped through. The forest on the other side felt different, closer, denser. The ground held moisture differently here, softer underfoot, absorbing sound instead of carrying it. He paused, listened. Nothing. Then continued. The trail did not run straight. It wandered, but not randomly. There were pauses, places where the animal had stopped, turned, waited. Rowan crouched at one of those points. The paw prints were deeper here, more pressure, a shift in weight, pain. He didn't need to guess. What one leg favoring, rear, not new, not fresh. An old injury carried forward. Rowan's jaw tightened, not anger, recognition. The forest opened into a narrow clearing. At its edge stood a structure that did not belong to nature. A storage building, weathered wood, corrugated metal roof. One side slightly collapsed inward. It sat too close to the lake to be permanent, too far from the road to be maintained. Abandoned. Or supposed to be. Rowan approached slowly. The door hung half open. He didn't touch it, just stepped inside. The air changed immediately, colder, stiller, and carrying something faint beneath it. Metal, oil, and something else. Rowan's eyes adjusted quickly. The interior was sparse, broken crates, rusted hooks, a length of chain coiled in one corner. He stepped forward, stopped, then looked down. Marks. Not footprints this time. Drag lines. And blood. Old, dried into the wood, darkened to a color that no longer resembled what it once was. Rowan stood there, not moving. The room didn't feel empty. It felt used. And then left. A sound behind him. Not close, but not far either. Rowan turned, stepping back out into the clearing. Nothing visible. But something shifted. The kind of awareness that didn't come from sight, but from memory. Rowan stepped just beyond the doorway, eyes scanning the edge of the trees. Then, movement. A shape between trunks, low, familiar in its silhouette. Not imagined, not mistaken. It stopped, just inside the shadows. The distance between them held steady. Rowan didn't speak, didn't move. The shape tilted its head. Slightly, a gesture so small it could have been missed, but not by him, because he had seen it before. Hundreds of times. In training. In silence. In moments where communication wasn't spoken, but understood. Rowan took one step forward. The shape didn't retreat, but it didn't come closer either. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees, not in panic, not in flight, but in choice. Rowan stood there longer than necessary. The clearing returned to stillness, but it wasn't the same stillness as before. Now it had edges, defined, occupied. He moved back into the building, looked again, this time slower, more deliberate. The chain in the corner was not random. It had been anchored, recently enough that the rust hadn't fully claimed it. Rowan crouched, running his fingers just above it, never touching. There were scratches on the floor beneath, repeated, circular. Movement constrained. A confined pattern. Not wild, not chaotic. Disciplined. Even here. Even like this. Rowan closed his eyes for a moment. And in that moment, the space filled with something that wasn't present. A dog standing. Waiting. Not breaking. Not resisting. Just enduring. He stood up again. Stepped back outside. The air felt different now. Sharper. Clearer. Because the unknown had narrowed, not solved, but shaped. The walk back was slower, not because Rowan was tired, but because every step now carried more than weight. It carried context. Near the edge of the yard, another figure waited. A man this time, younger than Deke, older than Rowan. Lean, with a posture that spoke of training rather than labor. His hair was cut short, not out of fashion, but out of habit. His face carried a few lines that didn't belong to age-thin scars near the jaw, a faint mark near his temple. Caleb Mercer. Caleb Mercer. Former SEAL. Same unit. Different exits. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking not at Rowan, but at the house. "You always pick the worst places," Caleb said. His voice was even. Not mocking, not warm. Just familiar. Rowan stopped a few feet away. "You always find them anyway." Caleb smirked slightly. "Someone has to." A pause. Then Caleb's eyes shifted, finally meeting Rowan's. "You been following the trail?" Rowan nodded once. "Yeah." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "You're not going to like what you find," he said. Rowan didn't respond. because liking it was never part of the equation. They stood there for a moment longer, not speaking, not needing to. The kind of silence that only existed between people who had once trusted each other with everything. Caleb stepped forward slightly, his gaze moving past Rowan to the boat. "To be honest," he said, "I thought you'd have left by now." Rowan followed his gaze. "I almost did." Caleb nodded. "Yeah." Another pause. Then, "They didn't report it right." That landed. Not loudly, but completely. Rowan turned his head slightly. "What?" Caleb exhaled slowly. "The dog." He didn't say the name. Didn't need to. "Recovered, transferred, then lost again in paperwork." Rowan's hands didn't clench, his posture didn't change, but something inside him aligned. Because now, there was no more space left for doubt. Caleb looked at him. "You still staying?" Rowan didn't hesitate. "Yeah." Caleb nodded once, then stepped back. "All right?" He didn't offer help, didn't give advice, just turned and walked away. Rowan stood alone again, but not the same kind of alone. He looked toward the trees, then toward the boat, then back at the house. Everything was still broken, still incomplete, still waiting. But now, it wasn't waiting blindly. The lake changed before the storm did. It always did. Rowan Vale noticed it that morning, the way the surface lost its quiet rhythm, the way the light stopped settling and instead fractured across small, restless movements. The wind had not yet risen, but something beneath the air had already begun to shift. He stood on the porch, one hand resting lightly against the worn frame, watching. Not waiting, not searching, just aware. The house behind him creaked softly, adjusting to the cold. The boards held their place. The door remained slightly off-center, but it closed now. That mattered. Everything held. Everything stayed. Rowan stepped down into the yard, boots pressing into the earth that had grown firmer overnight. The boat sat where it always had, upturned, steady, no longer abandoned. He did not approach it this time, and he didn't need to check, because what had chosen to come had not left. And if it had, it would come again. That thought did not bring comfort. It brought direction. By mid-morning, the sky had dulled into a heavy gray, pressing lower over Alder Reach. The trees along the northern edge leaned slightly with the wind, their branches stiff, whispering in a language that carried no warmth. Rowan moved toward that direction, not following tracks. Not anymore. He already knew where they led. The path north curved around the lake, narrowing into a line of packed earth and frozen roots. Few people used it. Fewer stayed long enough to know its shape. Rowan walked it like someone who didn't belong there, and yet understood exactly where to place his feet. The forest grew thicker the further he went. The light dimmed. The air held stillness differently here, not empty, contained. The cabin appeared slowly, not all at once. First a line that didn't belong to the trees, then a shape, a then structure. It stood at the edge of the lake, set back just enough to avoid the worst of the wind, but close enough to feel it. Built from dark timber, aged but maintained. Smoke did not rise from it, but it was not abandoned. Rowan stopped a few yards away. He didn't call out, didn't announce himself, because whatever existed here had already known he was coming. A figure stepped into view from the side of the cabin. Slow, unhurried, deliberate. Silas Boone. Silas Boone looked like a man shaped by weather rather than time. Late 60s, maybe older. His frame was lean, but not fragile built from years of labor that had not been softened by comfort. His shoulders held a slight forward curve, not from weakness, but from habit. His face was lined deeply, the kind of lines that didn't fade when he rested. His hair was gray and uneven, pushed back without care. A short, rough beard shadowed his jaw, more neglect than style. And his eyes were the only part of him that hadn't aged, clear, alert, and quiet. He wore a heavy coat, faded from use, patched in places that suggested he repaired things rather than replaced them. Gloves tucked into his belt, boots worn but solid. He looked at Rowan like someone measuring distance, not threat. "You've been walking around my side of the lake," Silas said. His voice was low, steady, carrying no edge. Rowan nodded once. "Yeah." Silas glanced past him briefly, toward the direction of the trees Rowan had come from. "Didn't expect you to come this far." Rowan's gaze didn't leave him. "I didn't expect to stop." Silas studied him, not suspicious, not welcoming, just understanding. Then he stepped aside. Not an invitation, but not a refusal either. Before Rowan moved, something shifted behind Silas. A shape, low, still, partially hidden by the angle of the cabin. Rowan's eyes caught it instantly. The outline, the posture, the weight distribution. Not imagined, not guessed. Recognized. The dog stood there. Not fully visible. Not concealed. Watching. Rowan didn't breathe for a moment. The world narrowed. Not to silence, but to focus. The dog's head tilted slightly. The same angle. The same calculation. The same patience. Then it stepped forward just enough for the light to touch it. And Rowan saw everything that time had done. The dog was larger than most, built for endurance rather than speed. Its coat carried the mixed tones of sable black, gray, and muted tan, but dulled, as if the color had been worn down rather than faded. The fur along its back lay uneven in places, not from neglect, but from time spent against surfaces that had not been kind. Its right hind leg bore weight differently. Not broken, but remembered. A healed injury that had never returned to full strength. Around its neck, the faint indentation of past restraint lingered beneath the fur, and its eyes still amber, still steady, but deeper now. Not searching. Knowing. Rowan didn't step forward, didn't call its name, because names belonged to the past, and whatever stood in front of him now had survived something beyond it. Silas spoke again, quieter this time. "Found him about a year back." Rowan's eyes didn't move. "Where?" "Storage building near the east dock." That matched. Too well. "He was tied," Silas continued. "Didn't bark, didn't fight. Just stood there." A pause. Waited. Rowan's jaw shifted slightly. Not tightening, just adjusting. "I couldn't get close at first," Silas said. "Took time." "How long?" "Long enough to know he wasn't going anywhere unless I walked away first." That made sense. Too much sense. Silas moved a step closer to the dog, not touching it, just existing within its space. "He doesn't follow commands," he added. Rowan finally looked at him. "No," he said quietly. "He never did." Silas gave the faintest hint of a nod. Thought so." The dog shifted its weight. One step. Forward, then stopped. The distance between it and Rowan held. Not fear. Not rejection. Balance. Rowan took a breath. Slow. Measured. And for the first time since he had arrived at Alder Reach, he allowed himself to see clearly. Not what had been. Not what he had hoped for. But what was. Silas glanced between them. "You knew him," he said. Not a question. Rowan nodded. "Yeah." Silas exhaled lightly, as if confirming something internal. "He's got a way of deciding things," he said. "Doesn't rush." Rowan's gaze returned to the dog. "I know." The wind shifted, stronger now. The lake behind the cabin moved in uneven patterns, small breaks forming along the surface. The storm was coming. Not later. Soon. Rowan looked once more at the dog, then at Silas. No words passed between them, because none were needed. Not here. Not for this. Rowan stepped back, just once. The dog did not follow, did not move. It remained where it stood between them. The storm did not arrive all at once. It gathered. Slowly. Quietly. Inevitably. By late afternoon, the sky above Alder Reach had collapsed into a single shade of gray, heavy and unbroken. The light that once moved across the lake now pressed downward, dim and strained, as if the world itself were bracing. Rowan Vale stood just beyond the edge of the trees, not yet returning to the house, not yet leaving the northern side of the lake behind. The wind shifted first, a long breath drawn through the forest, bending branches, lifting loose snow into thin spirals that dissolved before they touched the ground. He watched it, not with anticipation, but with recognition. Storms had patterns. So did men. So did animals that had learned to survive both. Behind him, the cabin remained still. Silas Boone had not followed. He had not asked Rowan to stay. He had not offered anything at all. That was the kind of man he was. One who understood that some moments did not belong to conversation. Rowan took a step forward, then another. He did not rush, but he did not linger either. Because something inside him had already aligned, not resolved, but decided. The first real gust hit as he reached the open stretch near the lake. It cut sideways, sharp enough to sting against his face, carrying fine particles of snow that scratched lightly against exposed skin. His shirt shifted under the force, fabric pulling, then settling again. The temperature dropped fast, not gradually, decisively. Rowan adjusted his stance slightly, lowering his center of gravity without thinking. Old habits, still useful. Halfway across the open ground, he heard it. Not the wind, not the ice shifting beneath the lake. A sound that did not belong to the storm. A voice. Faint. Strained. Rowan turned immediately. Not scanning. Locking. The sound came again. Short. Broken. From the direction of the shoreline further north, where the land curved inward and the ice formed uneven ridges along the edge, he moved. Not fast, not reckless, but direct. Each step placed with intention, cutting through the rising wind, boots digging into snow that had not yet settled but already resisted. The shoreline came into view through a veil of white, and with it, a shape, a man, on the ground. Partially collapsed near the edge of the frozen water, one leg twisted awkwardly beneath him. Silas. Rowan closed the distance, dropped to one knee beside him. Silas's face was pale, the color drained by cold and strain, but his eyes were still clear-focused, stubborn. "Slipped," Silas said, his voice low, breath uneven. "Ice gave under me." Rowan glanced at the leg. Not broken, but caught. Partially wedged between two uneven slabs of ice that had shifted and locked. Not impossible, but dangerous. The kind of position that didn't forgive hesitation. And Rowan shifted his weight, testing the ice with one hand, then the other. "Don't move," he said. Silas gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. Wasn't planning on it. The wind rose again. Harder this time. Visibility dropped. Snow moved sideways in thick sheets, blurring the edges of everything beyond a few feet. Rowan worked quickly, hands steady, movements precise. He adjusted the angle of Silas's leg, easing pressure first, then finding the point where force would release without causing more damage. Silas gritted his teeth, did not pull away, did not panic. Then, a bark. Sharp, controlled, not fear, not warning. Direction. Rowan froze for half a second, not because he didn't recognize the sound, but because he did. The bark came again. Closer this time. Through the white. And then, movement. The dog emerged from the storm like something that had always belonged to it. Atlas. He didn't run. He moved with purpose. Cutting through wind and snow in a straight line, his body low, as stable, unaffected by the chaos around him. He stopped just short of Rowan, looked at him, then turned his head slightly toward the ice, toward the exact angle where Rowan's hand needed to shift. Rowan didn't question it. He adjusted, applied pressure. The ice gave. Not loudly, but enough. Silas's leg came free. The dog stepped back immediately, not claiming space, not seeking contact, just confirming. Then returning his attention to Silas, positioning himself between the man and the wind. Rowan helped Silas sit upright. "Can you stand?" Silas nodded once, breath still tight. "Yeah." Rowan pulled him up carefully, supporting most of the weight at first, then easing off as Silas found his balance. The storm thickened. The world narrowed. Distance disappeared. They moved back toward the cabin slowly. Silas leaning slightly, but steady. Rowan adjusting pace without comment. Atlas walking ahead, then stopping, then adjusting again, never leading too far, never falling behind, always within range, always aware. Inside the cabin, the air felt different, not warm, but contained. Silas lowered himself into a chair near the wall, exhaling deeply. Rowan moved around the space without asking permission, finding what he needed, a cloth, a small tin of supplies, a worn kettle near the stove. He worked in silence, cleaning the scrape along Silas's leg, checking for deeper injury, wrapping it tight enough to hold, not tight enough to restrict. Silas watched him, not questioning, not surprised. "You've done that before," he said. Rowan didn't look up. "Yeah." Silas nodded. "Figured." A pause settled between them. The storm pressed against the walls, wind pushing at the structure like it was testing its limits. Atlas stood near the door, not lying down, not resting, watching. Silas followed Rowan's gaze. "He's been like that since I found him," he said quietly. Doesn't relax unless there's a reason to." Rowan's eyes stayed on the dog. "He always had one." Silas shifted slightly in the chair. "He pulled me out once before," he added. "Same way." Rowan looked at him now. Silas met his gaze. "Didn't hesitate," he said. "Didn't wait for me to ask." Rowan's jaw moved slightly. Not tightening. Just acknowledging. The storm began to settle. Not ending, but easing. The wind lost some of its edge. The snow fell straighter now. Less violent, more final. Rowan stood, moved toward the door, paused. Atlas watched him. Did not move. Rowan opened the door. The cold rushed in, but it no longer cut the same way, not because it had changed, but because he had. He stepped outside, then turned back once, not to Silas, to the dog. They held eye contact. No command. No signal. No expectation. Just understanding. Rowan nodded once, then stepped into the storm. And this time, he did not look back again. The storm passed the way it had come, without apology, without explanation. Morning did not break it revealed. Alder Reach lay under a fresh layer of snow, untouched, unmarked, as if the violence of the night had been folded neatly beneath something quiet and indifferent. The lake stretched wide and pale, its surface smoothed into a deceptive calm. The sky had cleared into a thin, brittle blue, the kind that held cold long after the wind had gone. Rowan Vale stepped out onto the porch. He paused there. Not because he needed to, but because he could. That was new. The air still bit at his skin, but it no longer cut the same way. It didn't press. It didn't demand. It simply existed, and for the first time in a long while, Rowan existed within it without resisting. He looked toward the mailbox. He did not walk to it. Instead, his gaze moved past it, toward the yard, toward the boat. The overturned hull stood steady against the snow, its edges rimmed with frost, its shape now part of the landscape rather than something left behind in it. Rowan stepped down from the porch, boots sinking lightly into the fresh layer. Each step left a mark. Clear, defined, temporary. He moved slowly. No urgency, no tension coiled beneath the motion, just presence. When he reached the boat, he stopped. Something lay beneath it. Small, still. At first it didn't move, then a shift, a tremble. Rowan crouched slightly, lowering himself just enough to see. A puppy, no more than a few months old. Its coat was a muted mix of brown and black, not yet settled into any clear pattern. The fur along its back stood unevenly, clumped slightly from dampness. One ear drooped more than the other, giving it an unbalanced, almost uncertain look. Its eyes were dark, too large for its face, and wide. Not with curiosity, with caution. Its front leg was held close to its body, not bearing weight. The limb wasn't twisted unnaturally, but it moved wrong, slow, guarded, as if the ground itself could not be trusted. The puppy did not growl, did not bark. It watched. Waiting. Rowan didn't reach for it, didn't make sudden movement. He simply remained where he was. Lowered. Steady. "You're early," he said quietly. The words weren't meant to be understood, only heard. The puppy blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion, then shifted its weight, carefully trying to reposition itself further under the shelter. Not fleeing, just protecting what space it had. Rowan studied it. Not clinically, not emotionally, just completely. He had seen injuries like that before, not severe, but untreated. Left long enough, it would become something permanent, something limiting, something that would change the way the animal moved through the world. Rowan exhaled slowly, a sound behind him, not from the road, not from the house, from across the lake. Rowan turned. Far in the distance, near the northern edge, a figure stood, small against the white. Still, next to it, another shape, larger, lower. The wind did not carry their details, but it carried something else, a feeling, not absence, not loss, recognition. The figure did not move, the dog beside it did not approach. They simply stood, and then, as the light shifted, they were gone, not hidden, not lost. Just no longer needed in the same frame. Rowan turned back. The puppy was still there, still watching, still waiting. He lowered himself further, resting one knee against the cold ground. The puppy tensed slightly, but did not retreat. Rowan extended his hand. Not toward the head, not toward the injured leg, just into the space between them. Open. Still. You don't have to decide right now, he said. His voice was quieter than before. Not because of the cold, because of something else. Something that had settled. The puppy leaned forward. Barely. Enough to sniff the air. Then paused. Its nose twitched once. Twice. Testing. Measuring. Then it took a small step. The injured leg lifted awkwardly, then lowered again, the motion imperfect but determined. Another step. Closer. Still unsure. But moving. Rowan's hand did not change position, did not rush to meet it. Because trust, real trust, was never taken, only given. The puppy reached him. Its nose touched his fingers. Cold, damp, alive. Rowan let the contact remain for a moment, then withdrew slightly, not rejecting, not pulling away, just creating space again. He stood slowly, careful not to startle it, then stepped back toward the house. 1 step. 2. He didn't look down, didn't check, didn't call. Come on, he said, almost casually. Let's see what we can do about that leg. The tone was light, not commanding, not coaxing, just available. Behind him, the puppy hesitated, then moved. 1 step. Pause. Another. The distance between them shortened. Not quickly, not completely, but enough. Rowan reached the porch. Stopped. Waited. Not turning. Not watching. Just giving time. After a moment, he heard it. The uneven rhythm of small steps against wood. Closer. Then stopping. Right at the edge. Rowan glanced back. Just once, the puppy stood there, framed by the doorway, still unsure, still cautious, but no longer alone. Inside, the house held a different kind of silence. Not empty, not waiting, occupied. Rowan moved toward the table, clearing space without thinking. His hands worked automatically, setting things aside, creating room, preparing without urgency, but with purpose. He didn't look back again. He didn't need to, because something had already crossed the threshold. Outside, the lake reflected the sky, unbroken, unchanged, and somewhere beyond it, a cabin stood. A man rested, a dog remained, not because it was told to, because it had chosen. Rowan bent slightly, reaching for a clean cloth. All right, he said under his breath. Let's fix what we can. The words carried no weight beyond the moment, and that was enough. Some miracles don't arrive the way we pray for them. They don't always bring back what we lost. They don't always restore things to the way they were. Sometimes God answers in a quieter way. He lets us see that what we loved is still alive, still cared for, still where it needs to be. And in that moment, the miracle is not in getting it back. The miracle is in finding peace without needing to hold on. Rowan did not lose his friend twice. He was given something greater, the chance to see that love does not end when paths separate. It continues, in another life, in another place, under the same sky. Maybe in your life, you are holding on to something, a person, a memory, a moment that you wish would come back exactly the way it was. But sometimes, God is not asking you to forget. He is asking you to trust. To trust that what was meant for you has already shaped you. To trust that what left you may still be living a story you cannot see. And to trust that your life is not empty just because something is no longer in your hands. Because the same God who allowed something to leave is the one who will send something new to your door when your heart is ready. Not as a replacement, but as a continuation. So if this story touched you in any way, take a moment to share where you are watching from. Tell us what you would have done in Rowan's place. Would you have called the dog back, or let it stay? Your voice matters, and your story matters too. If you believe in stories that heal, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who might need it today. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and bring peace to the places in your heart that are still waiting. And may you always have the strength to love, even when you have to let go.